Arthur's family truth. The knock came at 2:17 on a Sunday morning. 3 knocks. Not urgent. Not the way you knock when something's wrong. I knew it was Karen before I opened the door. I recognized the pattern. She'd knocked like that since she was 12. What I didn't expect was what I saw when I opened it. Her hair was unwashed, clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them, or hadn't slept at all. She had one bag over her shoulder, just one, for a woman who'd spent 6 years building a life in a 4-bedroom house 40 minutes from here. Derek was standing 2 steps behind her on the porch. Not next to her, behind her. He was looking at the ground. "Dad," Karen said. "We need to talk." I looked at the bag. I looked at Derek, who still hadn't looked up. I looked at my daughter's face, and I saw something I hadn't seen there since she was 19, standing in a hospital parking lot the night her first serious boyfriend wrapped his car around a utility pole and walked away without a scratch while 2 other people didn't. She was ashamed, not scared, not tired. Ashamed. I stepped aside and let them in. I didn't say anything yet. I've been an electrician for 31 years. When something's wrong with a circuit, you don't start pulling wires before you know where the fault is. You watch, you listen. You let the system tell you what it's trying to hide. Derek sat down at my kitchen table and finally looked up. That's when I noticed his hands. He kept pressing his palms flat on the table and then lifting them. Pressing, lifting, like he was checking that the surface was still there. I put the coffee on, and Karen started talking. My daughter Karen is 41 years old. I raised her alone from the time she was 14, when her mother died after a bad 6 months of ovarian cancer. Just the 2 of us after that, me, a working electrician in Dayton, Ohio, and a teenage girl who'd learned early that the world doesn't negotiate. We were close in the way that loss makes people close, when it strips everything back to the people actually standing next to you. I worked 35 years as an electrician, built my own company eventually, 4 guys, residential and commercial work. Nothing fancy, but it ran clean, and I ran it honestly. When I retired at 61, I had a paid-off house on Elk Street, solid accounts, and a reputation I'd earned 1 job at a time. I kept good records. That was a habit I'd built in the business and never dropped. You keep records, you keep copies, you don't wait until something's a problem to document it. Karen met Derek Ward 7 years ago. He was 40 at the time, smooth in conversation, the kind of man who makes a room relax. First night, Karen brought him home. He shook my hand firmly and called me Gary before I'd said a word about formality. I thought, I can work with this man. 6 years of Sunday dinners, 6 years of holiday tables, of watching him show up reliable, of seeing Karen genuinely happy for the first time in a while. I had no real complaint, not until Derek started talking about business. He had a phrase he used constantly, generational wealth. I heard it maybe 40 times over 3 years. Digital infrastructure. Platforms, ground floor opportunity. He talked about it the way some men talk about religion, like the concept was self-evidently true, and anyone asking hard questions just lacked vision. 8 months ago, the opportunity got specific, investors he'd connected with. A platform in development, a window that was closing fast. I asked questions. Derek's answers were smooth and general, and moved past anything concrete before I could get traction on it. 3 months later, Karen and Derek sold their house for $487,000 and put the full amount into Derek's venture. I found out after the sale closed. Karen called me, voice bright and slightly defensive, the way voices get when someone has made a decision they know you won't like. I didn't argue. I asked a few questions, got smooth answers, and that evening I called Jim Calloway, run a background check on Derek Ward. I said, everything you can find, and sit on it unless something urgent comes up. That was 6 months ago. 2 weeks after the house sale, Karen and Derek showed up at my door on a Sunday morning. Karen's clothes were wrinkled like she'd slept in them. Derek paced my front porch in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness and everything to do with a man running through options. I watched him through the screen door for a moment before I opened it. The investment didn't work out, Karen said. She couldn't hold my eyes. Derek stopped pacing. Market conditions, regulatory issues. It's temporary. We just need somewhere to stay while we get things sorted. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The weight she'd lost, the gray tinge under her eyes. The way she stood with her arms crossed in front of her chest, like she was bracing for a blow she already knew was coming. I told them no, not in anger. I kept my voice level. I said I loved Karen, that I wanted to help her find a real path forward, but that I wasn't going to open my house to a situation I hadn't been told the truth about. 35 years in business teaches you not to sign off on a project before you've seen the actual plans. Derek's expression changed, fast, like a switch thrown. The easy manner dropped, and what replaced it was something flat and cold. He told me I was small, said I'd spent my whole life playing it safe and wanted everyone around me to do the same, that I'd never built anything worth having. That I was trying to keep everyone at my level because it was the only level I understood. Karen touched his arm. He shook her off without looking at her. I said no one more time. He punched me, one shot right hand before I'd registered he was moving. My nose took the full force of it and I stumbled back against the doorframe. Hand going up automatically, blood starting from my left nostril. Karen screamed. Derek stood in my doorway, fists still clenched, chest heaving, and we all froze in one of those moments that feel longer than they are. He told me I deserved it, called me a selfish old man, said I'd slammed the door in my own daughter's face when she had nowhere to go. I told them both to leave. When their car backed out of my driveway, I stood in my hallway with a paper towel to my nose and looked at my reflection in the mirror for a long moment. Then I called Jim Calloway. Jim photographed my injuries before we sat down the next morning. Evidence, he said, and the way he said it told me this was heading somewhere that required evidence. He opened the manila folder. 6 months ago, you asked me to run a background check on Derek Ward. He laid the first photograph down. You told me to sit on it unless something urgent happened. A broken nose counts, I said. He nodded and kept laying photographs down. The silver-haired woman was named Dorothy Simmons, 71 years old, widow, 2 adult children, a savings account, and a piece of property near Columbus that she'd built over a lifetime. She had met Derek Ward 4 years ago, except his name hadn't been Derek Ward. His name was Harold Wicks. He'd been using variations of it for at least 8 years. Harold and Dorothy had been together 14 months. Within a year, she'd transferred the majority of her savings and signed documents putting her property in his name. She died 18 months later, heart failure officially. Her children had been contesting the transfers in probate court ever since. Jim laid down the next photograph. A brunette woman, early 50s, standing outside what looked like a city courthouse. Linda Karsten. Then another woman. Then another. Then 2 more. 6 confirmed, Jim said. Probably more we haven't connected yet. Every time, financially comfortable woman. Patient approach over 12 to 18 months. Voluntary signatures on every document. Then he disappears before anyone fully grasps what happened. He's never been criminally charged. Technically, nothing he's done is provable fraud. Everything gets signed willingly. I sat with that. I thought about the Sunday dinners, the firm handshake. The way he'd called me Gary the first night we met, like we were already past the stage of formality. What's his real target here? I asked. It's not Karen's house money. Jim folded his hands. It's you. He laid it out carefully. I was Karen's only family. If something happened to me and my estate passed to Karen, and then something happened to Karen, Harold would have clear access to everything I'd built. The house sale had been stage 1. Liquidate Karen's primary asset, establish financial dependency, and use that dependency to gain physical and legal proximity to me. The rest would follow from there. He also tried something else. Jim said. He pushed a document across. A life insurance application dated 2 months ago with Karen as primary beneficiary and Harold as alternate. Rejected by the insurer, you'd need to be present for the medical exam, but the application tells you where his thinking was. The punch was panic, I said. Not a question. His schedule got disrupted. You not letting them in was a problem he hadn't fully planned for. Then Jim slid the bank document across. Loan application, First National Bank, 3 weeks earlier. Karen's signature, $68,000 secured against my house, with an attached deed transfer showing I had signed 25% ownership of the property over to Karen as the collateral basis. I had never signed any such document. The forgery was good enough to get through a new loan officer at a small branch that hadn't followed proper verification procedures. The $68,000 had been deposited into an account Harold and Karen opened the same week. The house sale closed. There was more. A forged power of attorney, a medical directive stating I'd been diagnosed with early-stage dementia and that Karen should be consulted on all major financial decisions. Documents that, taken together, were a complete legal infrastructure for stripping me of control over my own life. I stared at the papers spread across Jim's desk and understood. for the first time, what I was actually looking at. Not a failed investment, not a bad marriage. A sequence. Each piece feeding the next, each one designed to advance toward a specific destination, me confused and compliant and legally accessible. "Get me a doctor," I said. "Today." Dr. Patterson saw me that afternoon. Blood draw, full panel. He called the following morning. Lorazepam, diphenhydramine, low doses, consistent exposure over at least 2 months. Combined, they cause fatigue and confusion, the kind that reads as natural aging if you're not specifically testing for it. The kind that makes you slower, more suggestible, easier to redirect when someone wants you to sign something. Karen had been bringing those supplements every week for 8 weeks. I want to be precise about this. I don't believe Karen knew what was in those bottles. I believe Harold told her I was showing early signs of cognitive decline, that he'd done research, that these were natural compounds that would support my memory and energy. I believe she came to my house every week, thinking she was a caring daughter looking after her father. Harold is careful about what he allows his accomplices to understand. I drove home from the doctor's office and sat in my kitchen for a long time. The next morning, Karen's car was on the street when I came downstairs. She was on my front porch steps alone, hair damp, jacket pulled close. She looked like she'd been awake for 36 hours and had spent most of that time rehearsing what to say. I stood at the bottom of the steps and kept the distance. She said Derek felt terrible, that he wasn't that man. I knew Derek wasn't a violent man. This was the stress. This was the pressure of everything falling apart at once. She had a way of delivering the words that made them sound slightly scripted, and I'd started noticing it more. I asked her about the loan. She went white the way people go white when something gets too close to look past. I signed what Derek handed me. She said, "He told me it was standard paperwork." Tea to the house sale. "Did you read it? Derek handles all of that. I don't always, Karen. Did you read what you were signing?" She looked at her hands. I laid the photographs on the step between us. Dorothy Simmons, the others. 6 photographs, 6 names, 6 versions of the same story, running back 8 years. She told me I'd fabricated them, that I'd never liked Derek and was building a case now to justify cutting him out, that I'd been saying strange things lately, making decisions that didn't make sense. I told her about the blood tests, about what was actually in the supplements she'd been bringing. Her face went still, not angry still, like something had been switched off behind it. He said they were from a health food store. They were prescription-strength sedatives. I have the lab report. She stared at the photographs for a long moment, and I watched her face. I watched it carefully, and I saw it, a real crack, the actual beginning of understanding moving through her expression like a current. And then it closed, like a door shut firmly from inside. "If I have to choose between you and Derek, I choose Derek." The words were clean and final. I could hear Harold in the cadence of them rehearsed, the kind of thing that sounds decisive because someone else decided it for you. I told her I was changing my will. Everything I'd planned to leave her was going to charity. Not punishment, the only real protection left. She couldn't hand Harold what she didn't stand to receive. She told me Derek had lawyers too. She was right. The guardianship petition arrived 3 days later, thick envelope, delivered by a process server who apologized twice before handing it over. Filed by Karen Richardson, she'd legally changed her surname to match Harold's current alias. The document claimed I was suffering from dementia, that my attorney was manipulating me, that I was incapable of making sound financial and personal decisions. It requested that Karen be appointed as my legal guardian, with full authority over my finances, my property, and where I lived, attached. Forged medical records describing my supposed deterioration. Sworn statements from 3 individuals I'd never met, each attesting to my confused state in different alleged encounters. I read it at Jim's desk with the photographs of Harold's previous victims still lying where they'd been when I'd first sat down that week. He filed, I said. "Yes," Jim said, "and now you understand why I showed you the file first." Jim had anticipated this move. He'd already arranged for Dr. Patterson to conduct a comprehensive cognitive evaluation, 4 hours of testing across 2 sessions, memory battery, executive function assessment, problem-solving sequences, extended clinical interview. The written conclusion was unambiguous. Above average cognitive performance for my age group, no indicators of dementia, no evidence of impaired judgment. We filed our response the same day the petition arrived, but Harold wasn't only fighting in court. The whisper campaign started small. My barber mentioned he'd heard I was having some family trouble. The woman who ran the coffee counter I'd used for a decade asked how I was doing with a look that said she'd already formed an opinion. My neighbor Janet Morrison, a woman I'd known 15 years, someone who'd brought me casseroles after my surgery. Someone I'd helped shovel out during the bad winter 2 years back, knocked on my door on a Thursday evening with a worried expression. Karen had visited her, told her I'd been making impulsive financial decisions, that my judgment had changed, that the people around me were taking advantage. Janet asked me carefully if I was all right. I told her everything: the punch, the forged documents, the blood tests, the photographs of the other women Harold had done this to. She listened. She'd known me 15 years, and she knew who I was. But the seed of doubt was there, and it was doing exactly what Harold intended. She left looking unsettled. When my granddaughter Amy called from California 3 days after that, I understood Harold had gotten there too. Amy was 23, and she loved her mother, and she'd heard a version of this story that made me out to be a bitter, controlling old man who'd cut off his daughter for no reason. When I tried to explain, Amy said carefully that her mother had told her I might say things like that the stress might be affecting my thinking. Harold had prepared her for every response. Every truth I might offer had been loaded in advance as evidence of exactly what he'd claimed was wrong with me. I called Sarah Martinez at the Dayton Daily News the next morning. Sarah was 27 and had been waiting for a real story. I handed her everything: Jim's complete file, the court documents, the blood test results, the photographs of the previous victims, the forged deeds and bank applications. She verified each piece independently before anything ran. The article appeared 4 days later. The response was immediate. The whisper campaign stopped within 48 hours. People who'd been passing along Karen's version of events went quiet when they saw the documentation laid out in print. Several people came forward with smaller stories about Derek, half-formed offers they declined, vague proposals that now made more sense in context. The most significant call came 11 days after publication. Thomas Simmons, Dorothy's grandson. He'd recognized Harold's photograph. After Dorothy died, the family had gone through her papers and found letters, dozens of them, handwritten by Harold during the 14 months he'd pursued his grandmother. Thomas said they read like a script, calculated, like someone following notes refined across multiple previous runs. And in one letter dated 2 full years before Harold ever met Karen, Harold had written about a future target, a retired electrician in Dayton, one grown daughter. A clean estate, notes about his daily schedule, the coffee shop he used, his regular routes. He'd spent 2 years studying me before he ever positioned himself to meet my daughter. The dinner party where Karen and Derek supposedly met by chance wasn't chance. Karen had been the approach vector. I had always been the destination. Jim took Thomas's letter directly to the FBI field office that afternoon. The federal case against Harold Wicks had been building for 2 years, and this was the piece that established clear premeditation across state lines. The warrant was issued Wednesday morning. By the time agents reached the motel where Harold and Karen had been staying, the room was empty. Harold had left sometime during the night. He took their documents with him, both passports, Karen's driver's license, both credit cards. 3 weeks later, Amy called. Her mother had been found at a police station in Las Vegas. No cash, no ID, no transportation. Karen had been in a women's shelter for 2 days before she managed to reach Amy by borrowing a phone. I sat on my porch for a long time after that call, not thinking about anything specific. Just sitting. Amy drove up from California the following month. She pulled into my driveway on a Tuesday afternoon and stood at the edge of the garden for a moment before walking toward me. She moved slowly, like she wasn't certain of her welcome. She had Karen's eyes and my chin, and she looked like she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. She didn't ask me to forgive her mother. Karen had told her not to ask. She said to tell you she's not asking for anything, Amy said. She just wants you to know she understands now. All of it. I asked if Karen was getting proper help. Counseling. She's starting to see how it worked, how he built everything around her until she couldn't see past the edges of it. Amy looked at her hands. She keeps saying she should have known, that there were signs. There are always signs, I said. Being inside something like that doesn't mean you can see out of it. Amy stayed for dinner. We talked about her job, the California apartment she was trying to afford, a road trip she was thinking about. We didn't talk about Harold or Karen or the previous year. There would be time for that, or there wouldn't. That dinner was its own thing. 6 months after Amy's visit, a letter came in the mail. Plain paper. Karen's handwriting, 2 pages. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask me to call. She wrote that she understood now what she'd chosen and what that choice had cost. That every time I'd tried to show her the truth, she decided to look away from it, and that she knew exactly what that had done. She wrote, "You were a good father. I made choices that made it impossible for you to keep being that. That's on me, not you. I hope you're at peace." I read it 3 times. Then I put it in the drawer in my office where I keep things I'm not ready to throw away and not ready to act on. I didn't write back. 14 months after Harold disappeared, Agent Collins from the FBI called me at home. Harold Wicks had been arrested in Cancun. He'd been running the same scheme on a 76-year-old American widow vacationing there. He'd moved too quickly. The woman's adult son had been visiting and recognized something was wrong early enough to call the authorities. Harold would be extradited to face federal charges across 4 states: wire fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse. The prosecutor expected 15 to 20 years. We recovered about $103,000. Agent Collins told me. From accounts we were able to trace of the $555,000 Harold had moved. Between Karen's house sale and the fraudulent bank loan, we got back roughly 1/5. I thanked her and put the phone down. I've thought about what to say about the money, and the honest answer is that it mattered less than I expected. The money was the mechanism, not the point. What Harold had actually wanted, what had made me worth 2 years of research before he made his move, was the life I'd spent 35 years building. The house on Elk Street, the accounts, the thing I'd planned to pass forward. He didn't get it, not because I was smarter than his other targets. I wasn't particularly. I'd been drugged, forged on, legally attacked, and cut off from my own family before any of this started breaking the right way. What protected me was simpler than any of that. A phone call made 6 months before everything came apart to a man who kept good files and hadn't thrown them away. A habit I'd built running a business. Keep records, make the call before you're certain. Don't wait until something is a problem to document it. Harold Wicks had been running this scheme for 8 years when he picked me. 6 women before Karen. Not one of them had made that call in time. I almost didn't either. A year and a half after Harold's arrest, Amy called on a Tuesday morning while I was staking tomatoes. Mom got into a job training program, she said. Medical billing, 8 months clean and sober. She's in transitional housing and she's doing the work. That's good, I said. She wanted me to tell you something else. She's not going to reach out anymore. She said she's caused enough damage and it's time to build her own life without involving you in it. I looked at my garden. The tomatoes were coming in heavy. The peppers along the south fence had taken well this year. That's the right call, I said. After Amy hung up, I went back to the work. It was a warm Ohio morning in early June. The light was low and clean, birds in the hedgerow, the kind of quiet that only exists when nothing is wrong and nobody is coming. I had a full row of tomatoes to finish and a whole afternoon ahead of me, and the house behind me was exactly as I'd left it, mine clean, belonging to nobody else. I'm 63 now. There's one thing about that letter Harold wrote to Dorothy Simmons, the one that mentioned me by first name 2 years before I ever heard his, that I still think about. He'd done his research carefully. He knew my schedule, my routes, my coffee shop. He knew about Karen and what kind of access she'd give him. He'd mapped the whole sequence out long before he shook my hand. What he hadn't mapped was the phone call I'd already made. That gap between what he knew about me and what I'd already quietly set in motion was the only distance I needed. One conversation, 6 months earlier, with a man who kept good files. Some protections work without you knowing they're working. A lawyer who doesn't throw anything away. A doctor who runs real blood work. One call made early, when something just doesn't sit right before you've built a case and before you can prove anything. Harold had been planning my destruction for 2 years. He just didn't know I'd already started building my defense before he arrived. That's the whole thing, really. That's all it was.